You know that warm, fuzzy feeling when you finally move into what seems like the perfect suburban sanctuary? That blissful illusion that you're done with noisy neighbors, unpredictable landlords, and your neighbor's 2 a.m. drum circles? Yeah, that dream lasted about 12 days for me. I'm Jake, 34, happily married to my much more patient wife Sarah, and professionally trained in sniffing out financial disasters as a forensic auditor. That last part? It turned out to be my superpower when the clipboard-wielding tyrant next door decided to declare war. So, there we were, fresh homeowners in Maple Ridge Estates. You know the kind of place: white fences, HOA newsletters with cheery fonts, and neighbors who wave like they're auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. It was supposed to be heaven. And it was, for about 288 hours. Our house came with a pristine, in-ground pool that practically whispered, "You've made it." Crystal clear water, perfectly installed tile, professionally landscaped edges. It was a Pinterest board come to life. The sellers were diligent people. They'd gotten all the permits, jumped through every HOA hoop, and handed over a 3-ring binder thicker than a Game of Thrones novel, containing every scrap of legal documentation we'd ever need. Or so I thought. Enter Brenda Matthews. Brenda moved in 2 weeks after us, dragging behind her a moving truck, a trail of judgmental energy, and what I assume was a lifetime subscription to Passive Aggression Monthly. She was in her late 50s, dressed like every day was a corporate compliance conference, and carried a clipboard like it contained nuclear launch codes. And here's the cherry. Brenda wasn't just any neighbor. Oh no, she was the HOA's self-appointed compliance officer. Now, you'd think someone with a title like that might at least introduce themselves with a smile and a welcome basket. Brenda introduced herself with suspicion and thinly veiled disdain. Our first encounter happened one blissfully warm Saturday morning. I was skimming leaves out of the pool, enjoying the closest thing I get to meditation, when I heard someone clear their throat with the energy of a disappointed principal. I turned around and there she was, standing near my fence, clipboard clutched to her chest, lips pursed so tight, I briefly wondered if she could still breathe. "Excuse me," she began, her tone the vocal equivalent of a cold slap. "I'm Brenda Matthews, your neighbor and HOA compliance officer. I need to discuss some irregularities with your property." And there it was, not even a full month in, and I was already in violation of something. I wiped my hands on a towel and approached cautiously, like she might cite me for stepping on a daisy. "Nice to meet you, Brenda," I said, trying to stay polite. "What kind of irregularities are we talking about?" She squinted at her clipboard like it contained divine prophecy. "This pool. I don't recall seeing documentation for it in our HOA files." I blinked. "You mean the pool that was installed 3 years ago? Fully permitted, city inspected, and HOA approved." "I'll need to verify that," she sniffed, as if my existence was personally inconveniencing her. "The HOA is cracking down on unpermitted modifications. We must preserve community standards. Now look, I've met plenty of bureaucrats in my life. I audit for a living. I've stared into the soulless abyss of expense reports and SEC filings. But Brenda? Brenda took paperwork pettiness to a spiritual level. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was on a holy mission. "Well, I have the original permits and approval documents from the previous owners," I offered. "Would you like to see them?" Brenda smiled. That tight, joyless smile you only see on DMV managers and Bond villains. "Yes, please have them copied and notarized for my review." Notarized. For her review. At that moment, I knew this wasn't about compliance. This was about control. And Brenda? She'd just decided that my pool was enemy number one. Over dinner that night, I told Sarah about the encounter. "She wants notarized copies of pool permits?" she asked, incredulous. She said it with a straight face, I replied. "And I think her clipboard might be possessed." Sarah chuckled and rolled her eyes. "Well, as long as we have everything in order, there's nothing she can do, right?" Bless her optimism. Like most suburban horror stories, ours started with paperwork. But it wouldn't end there. Oh no, Brenda was just getting warmed up. Over the next few days, she became a recurring character in our lives, a kind of overzealous neighborhood poltergeist. We'd see her lurking near our fence, pretending to adjust her lawn decorations, but really spying like a Cold War agent with nothing better to do. If paranoia was an Olympic sport, Brenda would have brought home gold. One morning, I found her inspecting the boundary line between our properties, tape measure in hand, muttering to herself. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was ensuring spatial compliance. I didn't even know what that meant, but it sounded like something out of the Matrix. I gave her the notarized copies the next day. She didn't thank me. She just said, "These will need to be reviewed by the HOA legal team," which I later found out meant Brenda and her cat, Pickles. But hey, I figured, give her what she wants and she'll move on. Spoiler alert, she did not move on. In fact, that clipboard of hers, it was just the opening act. If you've never been stalked by a clipboard, allow me to explain. It's like being audited by a mime. Silent, persistent, and absurdly invasive. Over the next few weeks, Brenda's obsession with my pool went from annoying to pathological. You'd think she discovered a meth lab behind my garage the way she kept inspecting my backyard with all the subtlety of a SWAT team. She appeared at our fence almost daily, always unannounced, always at the most inconvenient times. Sarah and I could be lounging poolside with drinks in hand, attempting to salvage our weekends, and boom, there she was, popping up like a judgmental prairie dog. "The pool lighting seems excessive," she announced one Tuesday evening, peering over the fence like a budget Bond villain. "It's solar," I replied, not bothering to hide the exasperation in my voice. "From Home Depot. Pretty sure the CIA isn't signaling me with them." She jotted something down on her clipboard like I'd just confessed to violating the Geneva Convention. And I'm not sure about the depth compliance. HOA regulations are very clear about maximum water volume per cubic foot. "I didn't realize we were doing oceanography now," I said. "Do you want the specs or a scuba dive?" That earned me a death glare that could curdle milk. But Brenda wasn't content with just verbal jousting. She escalated her campaign by transforming our home into her own private checkpoint. One day, I caught her snapping photos of the pool from behind a bush, literally crouched there like a suburban cryptid. Another time, she brought a portable laser measurer and started scanning the fence line while wearing a reflective vest, as if OSHA had personally deployed her to our backyard. I wish I was exaggerating. Sarah tried to keep the peace at first, bless her. Maybe she just really cares about the neighborhood, she offered, when I told her Brenda had complained that our pool float count, yes, the number of floats, violated the visual uniformity guidelines. She said 3 flamingos is disruptive to the aesthetic flow of the landscape. I replied, holding up the violation notice like it was radioactive. "How does 1 flamingo not disrupt the flow, but 3 do?" "She sounds passionate," Sarah said diplomatically, sipping her wine. "She's a clipboard with legs." Things took an even more surreal turn when Brenda stopped showing up alone. She began dragging along other board members like she was hosting educational field trips to the world's most dangerous backyard. First came Craig, the HOA treasurer who wore khakis like they were stitched onto his soul. Then Carol, whose sole personality trait seemed to be agree with Brenda and frown meaningfully. They'd nod along solemnly, while Brenda barked out infractions like she was conducting an exorcism. At one such inspection, Brenda pulled out a tape measure and theatrically extended it from my pool deck to the fence. 3 inches beyond the approved setback, she declared triumphantly, as if she'd just discovered the Rosetta Stone. I handed her a printed copy of the original blueprint. The approved plans show the deck exactly as built. She stared at it, squinting. "Plans can be forged. And logic can be murdered," I muttered. Eventually, I got an actual letter, an official violation notice from the HOA. It stated that my pool was potentially non-compliant with community standards, and that I had 30 days to remedy the situation or face escalating fines. The word potentially did a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. I remember standing in the kitchen holding the notice, just blinking at it like it was written in Martian. Sarah walked in, saw my expression, and raised an eyebrow. "Please tell me that's not from Brenda." "Oh, it's from the whole HOA," I said, holding it up like a hostage note. "Signed, sealed, and sanctimonious. What happens if we don't remedy the situation?" Apparently, we faced the wrath of Brenda's clipboard. She groaned. This is completely insane. Maybe we should just talk to her, see what it would take to get her off our backs. I don't think it's a negotiation, I said. She's not enforcing rules. She's waging a holy war. And indeed, Brenda's campaign of pool persecution evolved into a structured, daily operation. Every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, because of course it was, she'd appear near the fence with her clipboard, snapping photos and muttering like a disturbed census worker. Documenting the pH level violations, she'd say, gesturing vaguely toward the pool. How are you measuring pH from across the yard? She ignored the question, instead scribbling into her notebook like she was decoding enemy transmissions. I tried everything. Reason, humor, sarcasm, even straight-up legal citations. Nothing worked. I might as well have been arguing with a printer error message. Brenda didn't listen because she wasn't there to solve a problem. She was there to win. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. Flyers were hand-delivered to every house on our block. Brenda, in her infinite restraint, titled the meeting, Urgent Community Safety Concerns Regarding Unpermitted Pool Structure. Bolded, underlined. Like my pool was a ticking time bomb, and she was Tom Cruise on a mission. The meeting was set for the following Thursday. According to the notice, the HOA board would be discussing immediate remediation options. Reading between the self-important lines, Brenda was preparing to euthanize my pool in front of a live audience. So, I did what any forensic auditor with a vendetta and a pile of binders would do. I declared war back. For the next 4 days, I transformed our dining room into a command center. Permits, inspection reports, notarized letters, emails from city officials. I dug up every scrap of documentation I could find. It was like building a legal nuke out of printer paper. By the time I was done, I had a folder the size of a phone book and an attitude to match. Brenda wanted a meeting? I was bringing the receipts. All of them. The night before the HOA meeting, I was up at 2 a.m., cross-referencing inspection forms like a caffeinated librarian. Sarah came downstairs, took one look at the stacks of paper covering the table, and sighed. You look like you're preparing for a trial. Oh, I am, I said. A trial by clipboard. She smirked, then leaned over and kissed me on the head. Just don't forget to breathe. I'll breathe when she stops filing paperwork. Little did I know, while I was busy assembling my legal fortress, Brenda was preparing a PowerPoint presentation so diabolically misguided, it would make your high school group projects look like Pulitzer submissions. But that was just the opening act of the spectacle. If you've ever wondered what happens when an HOA board member becomes possessed by the spirit of a disgraced hall monitor, wonder no more. Brenda's vendetta had officially left the realm of passive-aggressive neighbor behavior and entered full-blown delusion. At this point, if I so much as sneezed near the pool, I was half expecting a fine labeled unauthorized mucus discharge. The harassment became systematic, methodical, like she'd opened a spreadsheet titled Ways to Ruin Jake's Day and decided to work through it alphabetically. And I swear, she must have had a daily timer set for 6:59 a.m. because every single morning, without fail, she showed up. There she'd be, standing sentinel at the edge of her property line like some kind of HOA gargoyle. Clipboard? Check. Pen poised like she was writing the next installment of War and Peace. Pool edition? Double check. She started photographing everything. Our backyard from every angle, including what I'm 95% sure was a shot taken from her second-story bathroom window. Creepy? Definitely. Legal? Probably not. But Brenda didn't care about the law, unless it was one she invented. 3 flamingo floats, 2 loungers, and 1 giant inflatable pizza slice, she announced loudly one morning, her voice cutting through the air like a chainsaw. That exceeds the HOA float decorum clause. The what now? I asked, standing poolside with my coffee and an expression of pure disbelief. Section 7B of the HOA Landscaping and Aesthetic Guidelines, she recited without looking up, as if she had the entire thing memorized. Pretty sure that section refers to flower beds. It refers to visual harmony, Mr. Collins. Ah yes, visual harmony, clearly disrupted by aquatic poultry. But Brenda wasn't just operating solo anymore. No, She'd turned our pool into a neighborhood conspiracy theory. Within a week, she'd rallied 2 more board members to join her personal hit squad. They started arriving in pairs, like clipboard-wielding Jehovah's Witnesses who only wanted to talk about pool chemistry and fencing alignment. I even started giving them nicknames. Craig became clipboard number 2. Carol was head nod number 1. The third one, I think his name was Marvin, never spoke. He just measured things and grunted. Then came the piece de resistance, the emergency HOA meeting. I don't know what I expected. A tense room, a few angry stares, maybe some passive-aggressive cookies. What I walked into felt more like a political rally hosted by someone who'd lost an election to a dog. The community center was packed. People I'd never seen in my life were suddenly very interested in the saga of the pool that threatened suburbia. Chairs were arranged in neat rows. A projector had been set up at the front of the room. And there, center stage, was Brenda. She was dressed like a prosecutor at a Senate hearing. Navy blazer, power necklace, and glasses she didn't need but wore for dramatic effect. Her clipboard had been replaced with a leather-bound folder. Upgrades. She smiled at me when I walked in. That kind of smile you'd see from a cartoon villain just before they pulled a lever to drop you into a pit of crocodiles. "Thank you for joining us, Mr. Collins," she said into the mic, like she was hosting a TED Talk. "Tonight's topic is urgent community safety concerns regarding unpermitted pool structures." I sat down next to Sarah, who whispered, "Did she really make a PowerPoint?" "Oh, she made a PowerPoint." Brenda clicked to slide 1. It was titled, "The Maple Ridge Pool Crisis." Slide 2. A blurry, zoomed-in photo of our pool taken from what I can only assume was her attic, complete with a giant red circle drawn around a single pool float. Slide 4. Brenda said dramatically, "Clearly shows the pool exceeding approved dimensions. This poses serious legal concerns." I raised my hand. "Brenda, that's not my pool layout. That's a stock image from a pool brochure. Are you saying I don't know how to identify noncompliance?" "I'm saying you don't know how to use Google reverse image search." The room murmured. But Brenda wasn't backing down. Oh no. She had graphs. Charts. A table that claimed my pool was directly correlated with decreased property values, increased mosquito populations, and, somehow, traffic congestion. Then she introduced her expert witness, Gary. Gary was a stocky guy in his mid-40s, wearing a polo shirt emblazoned with Aqua Pro Pool Solutions, which I later learned wasn't a company so much as a side hustle that had existed for about 8 weeks. He was also Brenda's cousin. "In my professional opinion," Gary said, adjusting his sunglasses, which he wore indoors, because of course, "this pool deviates from standard residential expectations." "What are your qualifications exactly?" I asked. "I owned an above-ground pool in college." "So did I. Doesn't mean I should testify in court." Gary blinked. The room blinked. At that moment, I realized Brenda had done something fatal. She'd mistaken noise for strategy. Her entire campaign, every clipboard scribble, every impromptu inspection, was built on the assumption that no one would push back, that I'd fold like a lawn chair the minute things got uncomfortable. Big mistake. I stood up. I didn't need a mic. Just a file folder and 20 pages of irrefutable fact. "Since we're talking about professional opinions," I began, pulling out my neatly organized, thoroughly verified, city-stamped documents. "Let's get into some actual data." Brenda flinched like someone had just slapped a steak onto her vegan potluck. "The dimensions on Brenda's slide? Not my pool. The real ones are right here, signed off by the city inspector, the HOA approval committee, and the original contractors. You'll also find the building permit, the post-installation inspection, and photos from the final city sign-off." I started handing out copies. Furthermore, the property value analysis Brenda cited was from a real estate blog last updated in 2009. And Gary, our expert, has 0 certifications, though I admire his confidence. Chuckles rippled through the room. Gary slid lower in his chair. Brenda tried to interrupt. "Those documents could be. They're certified. From the city office. I picked them up yesterday. You're welcome to call them now." The silence was thick enough to swim in. The board looked around. People were whispering. Not with Brenda. About Brenda. But she wasn't finished. She pulled her final card. Regardless of those documents, she said, voice shaking slightly, the board has received numerous anonymous complaints about this pool. We are obligated to act. Great, I said, flipping open another folder. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request last week. All communications, complaint records, meeting minutes. Want to know how many complaints you received? Brenda's face went pale. 1. All from the same IP address. Registered to your house. Gasps. Real, audible gasps. I didn't even know that was a thing that happened outside soap operas. Brenda opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because now the whole room realized something. This wasn't about community standards. This was about Brenda trying to execute a heist. One that was just getting started. The atmosphere in the community center was no longer HOA meeting. It was full-on courtroom drama. You could almost hear the law and order gavel in the background. Brenda, who had started the night standing like she was posing for a bronze statue, was now visibly sweating. Her air of clipboard-fueled superiority was cracking faster than a sidewalk in an earthquake. The board members, Craig, Carol, and the silent Marvin, looked like they had been caught in a group project they hadn't signed up for. Craig suddenly developed a deep interest in his shoelaces. Carol was flipping through her copy of Brenda's Pool Crisis packet like it might start making sense on the fifth read. And Marvin hadn't moved in 20 minutes. I was beginning to think he was in shock or just really good at emotional detachment. Brenda cleared her throat and tried to recover. Regardless of the origins of the complaints, she said, clinging to her last fragment of control, the board reserves the right to enforce community standards when there's credible concern. And in this case, there's clear ambiguity. Brenda, I said, not even trying to hide my smirk, the only ambiguous thing here is your definition of credible. The room snorted. Brenda blinked rapidly, then pulled out what she must have thought was her ultimate weapon, a folder thicker than a sandwich from a New York deli. This, she said, slapping it down on the table, is the board's internal assessment and legal review, concluding that remediation may be required to maintain visual and structural compliance. We've consulted with experts, including my cousin, a licensed pool technician, and received a contractor's report on necessary corrections. I stepped forward, pulling out my own folder. Great, because I also have a report from the actual city inspector who signed off on the installation, and a second opinion from a state-certified structural engineer. Oh, and unlike your expert, neither of them has a financial stake in the outcome. Brenda hesitated. She knew what was coming next. But at this point, it wasn't just about the pool. It was about dragging every little piece of her scheme into the fluorescent light of the community center. I'd like to read a few names, I said, unfolding a printed spreadsheet. These are vendors who've received HOA payouts over the last 6 months for consulting services. The total? Over $30,000. There was a quiet gasp. Not dramatic, but that collective inhale that tells you you've just reached the good part of the movie. Now, I continued, tapping the sheet. Every one of these vendors is tied to Brenda, either by surname, shared address, or common LLC registry. Maple Ridge Property Consulting? Registered to her home. Safety Solutions Incorporated? That's her cousin Gary's operation. The Pool Safety Assessment? Quoted at $8,000. Guess who the invoice came from? Gary looked like he wanted to disappear into his folding chair. And those invoices? I said, lifting another document. Not just copies. These are the originals. I pulled them using a transparency clause in the HOA's bylaws. Craig coughed into his sleeve. Carol suddenly became fascinated by her pen. Marvin may or may not have muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, well, damn. Brenda's face was pure denial, but it was stretched thin. That's circumstantial. They're qualified. There was nothing improper. There was everything improper, I said, slamming down the final document. Because here's the best part. Brenda filed her permit application for a pool installation, identical specs to mine, just 3 days after sending my first violation notice. The silence could have swallowed the whole building. That's a lie, she barked, but her voice cracked. No, I said, producing a printed copy of her permit submission. This is from the city planning office. Dated, stamped, and with your signature. You filed for your pool the same week you tried to get mine declared illegal. Heads in the room were swiveling now. I could see neighbors glancing at each other like, wait a second. People who had shown up for a boring HOA meeting had found themselves front row at a neighborhood expose. Brenda was losing her grip, not just on her argument, but on her audience. I'd also like to point out, I continued, that the lot size on Brenda's property doesn't meet the setback requirements she's been quoting to me. So if she's saying my pool breaks the rules, guess what that means for hers? Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down at her folder. Her clipboard, the sacred artifact of her power, now sat untouched on the table like an obsolete relic. At this point, the room was humming. Neighbors leaned in, whispering. One guy in the back audibly whispered, "Yo, she tried to steal his pool," which was only mildly exaggerated. Brenda tried one final Hail Mary. The HOA board is within its rights to enforce policy. If we vote for remediation, the homeowner is obligated to comply. I held up one last document, the HOA's procedural guide, laminated for extra pettiness. Only if there are multiple, substantiated complaints and a conflict-free inspection. Both conditions? Not met. You made up the complaints, you organized your own inspections, and the conflict of interest here is bigger than your cousin Gary's failed above-ground pool. Gary looked personally offended. I didn't care. Now Craig finally spoke. Brenda, is this true? Her mouth opened again, but no words came out. Just silence, fear, and the slow collapse of whatever fantasy she'd built around her authority. She looked around the room. No allies. No nods of agreement. Just dozens of faces realizing they'd been had by a clipboard queen with a god complex. Carol, looking green, turned to the rest of the board. I think we need to, suspend this meeting and reevaluate some things. You think? Brenda stood up suddenly. This isn't over, she said, clutching her briefcase and storming out like she expected someone to follow her. No one did, because everyone in that room had just seen the curtain pulled back. Brenda wasn't the protector of community values. She was just another schemer who thought no one would challenge her. Too bad for her. I audit fraud for fun. If Brenda thought her dramatic exit would leave the room shaken, she miscalculated. This wasn't a courtroom drama. It was a neighborhood reckoning, and she'd just been exposed in 4K with surround sound. By the time the door swung shut behind her, the only thing echoing louder than her heels was the collective realization. She wasn't just a nuisance. She was a con artist in a power suit. The board called a brief recess. Translation: we need 10 minutes to decide whether we've been accessories to petty fraud. I watched Craig, Carol, and Marvin huddle near the snack table, whispering with the urgency of people whose HOA reputations were turning into flaming wreckage. Meanwhile, I remained seated, calm, composed, folding my documents with the kind of slow, deliberate satisfaction you can only earn after delivering a professional-grade takedown in front of your neighbors and 3 dozen over-sugared cookie trays. Sarah leaned in. You just went full law and order on them. I haven't even shown them the audit, I whispered. Her eyes widened. There's more. Oh, honey, we haven't even reached the financial fireworks. See, the thing about fraud is that it's never just one scheme. You give someone like Brenda a clipboard and no oversight, and suddenly she's embezzling your HOA dues to fund her personal war on pool freedom. I'd suspected from the start that this wasn't just about aesthetics. The timing was too perfect, the harassment too aggressive. So while she was busy snapping blurry photos of my pool noodles, I'd been busy conducting what could only be described as a hostile financial colonoscopy. Let's rewind 2 weeks. After receiving that laughable violation letter, I filed a formal HOA records request under our bylaws. Most people don't even know those rules exist, but I've read more fine print than a prescription drug lawyer. What came back? A 27-page PDF of transaction logs and invoices. And oh boy, it was a goldmine. First red flag. Over $15,000 paid out to a company called Maple Ridge Property Consulting. That's weird, I thought. We don't have a property consultant on retainer. We're not running a hotel. We're running a cul-de-sac. Second red flag. The company had been founded just 3 days after Brenda moved in. Registered address, Brenda's own home. Business phone number also matched her HOA contact sheet. Third flag, there weren't any others because Brenda had already exhausted the entire red flag factory. Over the next hour, I walked the meeting attendees through a greatest hits compilation of Brenda's most creative accounting decisions. Here, I said, handing out copies. We have 6 invoices from Brenda's company. All 4 neighborhood evaluations. Funny thing is, each one followed a property violation, including, surprise, surprise, mine. Gasps. Again, the community center was turning into a symphony of betrayal. And this one, I said, pointing to another entry, is a consulting fee for $8,000 tied to a pool safety report, paid to a business called AquaSafe Assessments. Anyone want to guess who owns that? A woman in the back raised her hand. Gary. Correct. Our favorite pool expert with the structural engineering degree from the University of Made-Up Credentials. I turned to the board, now visibly sweating through their name tags. Every safety concern she raised was followed by a contractor recommendation. Every contractor? Family, cousins, nephews, one guy who's listed on her Christmas card list. This wasn't community oversight. This was a kickback scheme. Craig finally found his voice. So, you're saying Brenda was profiting from enforcing violations? I nodded. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was creating them, turning harmless infractions into revenue streams. And the best part? Most of the services billed to the HOA were never even performed. Ghost consultations, phantom inspections. This is textbook soft fraud. Carol looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. We didn't know. You didn't ask, I replied. Because no one expects to need forensic accounting at a potluck HOA. Someone in the crowd chuckled nervously. And it wasn't just me, I continued. One neighbor paid $5,000 for a landscaping correction plan because Brenda said his rose bushes were intimidating. Another was fined for excessive seasonal decor. His crime? 2 inflatable reindeer. A woman near the front stood up. She said my shutters were culturally discordant. I paid for a paint consultation. Yep, I said, flipping to the relevant invoice. $7.50. To another Matthew's cousin. Now the room was boiling. You could feel the mood swing from shock to fury. People were pulling out phones, whispering to their spouses, shaking their heads with the resigned frustration of homeowners who just realized their dues funded Brenda's family reunion. I brought it all home. The only reason Brenda went after my pool was because she couldn't get one approved for herself. Her lot doesn't meet the setback requirements. So instead, she tried to get mine declared illegal. That way, if I was forced to remove it, she could claim precedent to get hers built. Classic bait-in scheme. Sarah leaned in and whispered, "That's not just fraud. That's villain origin story fraud." I smiled. That's why I brought one last thing. From my folder, I pulled out a timeline I created. A visual map, printed on poster board because nothing makes people angrier than color-coded betrayal. Each date showed a violation Brenda issued, followed by a quote from one of her contractors, and finally an HOA payment. It was a perfect daisy chain of corruption. And yes, I said, tapping the last date, that includes the payment for Gary's emergency pool review, which he conducted while wearing flip-flops and a novelty tank top. Gary turned beet red. By the time I sat down, the room was in full rebellion mode. People were passing around the timeline like it was the gospel. You could see the exact moment every neighbor realized their home had been turned into a revenue target. And the board? They were cornered. They couldn't spin it. Couldn't both sides it. Not when the paper trail was this damning. Craig stood up slowly. "Mr. Collins. Jake, on behalf of the board, I want to say." "Save it," I said. "This isn't about apologies. It's about accountability. Starting with a full forensic audit of every HOA transaction from the last year. And immediate removal of Brenda from any board position or vendor relationship. Permanently." There was a long pause. Then the room exploded in applause. Like actual applause. I didn't even know that was possible at an HOA meeting. I half expected someone to start the wave. Brenda's clipboard? It sat abandoned at the front of the room. I thought about picking it up, maybe framing it. But no, I had something better planned for that particular artifact of tyranny. Justice wasn't just coming. It was bringing an audit trail, a legal team, and a 3-ring binder with color-coded tabs. If you've ever watched someone go from untouchable to unemployable in under an hour, you know it's equal parts tragic and satisfying. Brenda's fall from grace wasn't a stumble. It was a full-blown nosedive into the shallow end of a pool she never got to build. And I wasn't done pushing her under. The board, likely trying to avoid being included in any future Netflix docuseries titled HOA Heist, The Suburban Scam, agreed, begrudgingly, and with Craig's voice cracking like a teenager at prom, to open an internal investigation. What they didn't know was that I had already started one. See, after I exposed the $30,000 gravy train Brenda had constructed out of duct tape and nepotism, I didn't stop at HOA invoices. Oh no, I've worked in fraud detection for over a decade. I once found $4.3 million in misappropriated funds buried in a dentist chain's coffee budget. Brenda and her clipboard of chaos? Child's play. I dove into public records, vendor databases, and business registration filings like a caffeinated bloodhound. And what I found? Let's just say it was a spiderweb of side hustles, shell companies, and familial freeloaders, all orbiting Planet Brenda like a constellation of tax evasion. It started with Maple Ridge Property Consulting. That was the mothership, the company she used to invoice the HOA for her community assessments. According to her filings, the business was dedicated to preserving neighborhood integrity. What it was actually doing was funneling HOA dues directly into Brenda's personal bank account. Next came Safe Surroundings Inspections, LLC, owned by Brenda's niece, specialized in fence line violations and landscape harmony. Sounds like a BuzzFeed quiz. The company billed over $9,000 to the HOA during a 3-month period, none of it backed by reports, photos, or actual visits. Just invoices with phrases like hedge encroachment observed and ambiguous foliage risks. Yes, ambiguous foliage. That was a real entry. Then I found AquaSafe Assessments, good OL Gary's outfit. Turns out, Gary had billed 3 separate neighborhoods for expert reviews in the past year. His entire resume consisted of formerly owned an above-ground pool and a YouTube video titled How to Shock Your Pool Without Electrocuting Yourself. I cross-referenced all of it, building a flowchart so detailed it looked like a mafia caseboard. By the end, I had over 60 flagged transactions involving Brenda or her relatives, most of which violated the HOA's conflict of interest clause. But the crown jewel? That came when I requested Brenda's communications with vendors through the HOA email portal and found bribes, thinly veiled, typo-written bribes. In one message to her niece, she wrote, "Just need a few more invoices to push through Q4 budget. Make them look official-ish. Can you backdate them for July?" In another, she emailed Gary. "Reminder, your expert report needs to include language about non-standard slope hazards. Use legal-sounding stuff. Jake's pool isn't going down without pressure." That was it. The smoking gun. A direct order to fabricate expert evidence to justify a bogus fine. I packaged everything into a formal report. 87 pages, appendices, highlighted correspondence, the works. Sarah read the whole thing and said it gave her whiplash and heartburn. I emailed a copy to the HOA board, another to the City Council Ethics Committee, and just for fun, a third to the State Attorney General's office. Within a week, Brenda was removed from the HOA board by unanimous vote. No ceremony, no farewell speech. Just a motion, a vote, and one hell of a satisfying silence. But it didn't stop there. The City Planning Office, now very interested in Brenda's extracurricular consulting, suspended all permits tied to her family business's pending investigation. Gary's business license was revoked. Turns out, he forgot to renew it 3 years ago. Oops. The IRS opened a case after someone, sent them a tip regarding unreported income and suspected fraudulent deductions tied to home office swimming pool assessments. Brenda's house? It suddenly had a giant for sale sign out front. I overheard from another neighbor that she was taking a break in Florida with her sister. I like to imagine the break involved awkward family dinners and Gary apologizing for being a pawn in her suburban Ponzi scheme. In the meantime, the board scrambled to save face. They launched a full audit of HOA spending, revised their vendor policies, and enacted new transparency bylaws requiring all future contracts be voted on in open meetings. I'd become the HOA's accidental whistleblower, a role I neither asked for nor particularly wanted, but oh, did it feel good. Neighbors started coming out of the woodwork. People who'd been too scared or too annoyed to speak up about Brenda before. One guy thanked me for finally ending his year-long battle over unauthorized gnome displays. Another had spent $2,000 on a deck angle correction that turned out to be Brenda borrowing his patio furniture and returning it crooked. The irony? Brenda's own pool installation was officially denied. The very setback limits she accused me of violating applied doubly to her tiny lot. She'd spent months scheming, manipulating, and manufacturing fake rules, only to get denied because her own property wasn't big enough. Karma's favorite tool? Municipal zoning. And me? I got a new nickname. The Pool Guy. Not because of the pool itself, but because I'd cleaned out more rot than a chlorine shock treatment ever could. One of the new board members even asked if I'd consider joining the HOA. I laughed so hard I nearly pulled a muscle. No thanks, I said. I've already done my time. Still, I attended the next meeting, clipboard in hand, just for the laugh. People clapped when I entered. Someone brought margaritas. Revolution, it turns out, tastes like lime and justice. It would have been enough, more than enough, to expose the invoices, the nepotism, the fake expert testimony, the backdoor consulting. But I wasn't in this just to stop Brenda. I wanted her legacy scorched so thoroughly they'd have to invent a new word for disgraced. Because while everyone was focused on the bribes, the bogus inspections, and the subtle but very not subtle fraud, I had zeroed in on something juicier. Brenda wasn't just trying to find me into compliance. She was trying to steal my pool. Not metaphorically, not conceptually. I mean, she was engineering a legal loophole to get me to tear down my perfectly legal pool, so she could argue for permission to build hers. It started with a document I found buried in the HOA's pending projects folder. Just a casual little form labeled Residential Pool Installation Request, Brenda Matthews. The dimensions? Identical to mine. The depth? Identical. Even the blueprint layout looked suspiciously familiar, like copy-paste familiar. But here's the kicker. She'd filed it the same week she submitted her first complaint against my pool. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, until I saw the second document. A formal appeal Brenda had drafted to the city's zoning committee arguing that my pool's non-compliance should be grounds for leniency on setback enforcement. Her pitch? A precedent has already been set in Maple Ridge Estates for exception to side yard limits. Translation: get Jake's pool torn out, then argue the same setup should be allowed on her smaller lot. She wasn't fighting me because she hated pools. She was fighting me because she wanted mine removed so she could build a carbon copy. It was Ocean's 11, HOA edition. Only Brenda wasn't George Clooney. She was more like if George Clooney were replaced with a particularly angry spreadsheet. I laid it all out at the next board meeting. Yes, I showed up again, because who walks away right before the final boss battle? This, I said, holding up the permit request, was submitted by Brenda on March 14th, same week as my first violation notice. Coincidence? Maybe. Except she attached these architectural plans, identical to mine in every measurable way. Gasps. Again. You'd think by now we'd be out of gasps, but Brenda was a renewable resource of audacity. Now, here's her appeal. I continued, waving another document. She argues that since the HOA previously allowed a pool of this size, mine, on a Maple Ridge property, the same setback standards should be waived for hers. The only problem? Mine was already legal. Her lot isn't. Carol leaned in, whispering something to Craig that looked suspiciously like, "Oh my God." But it gets better, I said. Because here's the contractor quote she received for excavation, dated 2 days after her first violation notice against me. She wasn't just hoping I'd get fined. She was planning for demolition. Even Marvin made a noise. It sounded like a groan, and a laugh got stuck in his throat at the same time. Brenda wasn't at the meeting, obviously. She'd ghosted the neighborhood harder than an ex who owes you money. But the fallout? That arrived in spades. The board unanimously voided all of Brenda's pending permits. The city confirmed her application had been flagged and permanently denied due to the violation of zoning minimums. And they weren't subtle about it. I got a printed statement from the zoning department that read, "Applicant attempted to exploit enforcement inconsistencies to justify non-compliant development on substandard property dimensions. Request denied." That's city planner speak for nice try, scammer. I wasn't done, though, because Brenda had made one last attempt to push her narrative. She had filed anonymous complaints with the HOA using names like Concerned Resident Number 12 and Poolwatch 88. I kid you not. I traced every one of them back to her IP address using the HOA's digital complaint submission system logs. Pro tip: if you're going to impersonate 12 different angry neighbors, maybe don't do it from your home Wi-Fi. I handed that info to the board, too, along with a printed copy of each submission. Some were written with dramatic flair, like, "I fear for the safety of our children with that monstrosity of a pool. Who knows what lurks beneath?" Brenda wasn't just trying to be manipulative. She was LARPing as a suburban Cassandra. And just in case there was any doubt left, I shared one final screenshot, Brenda's personal notes from her HOA cloud folder. She'd forgotten to delete a draft labeled Pool Argument Strategy V3. Inside, a checklist. Get Jake's pool flagged, emoji done. Push for board vote on removal, emoji not yet. Use removal precedent to push city to approve new install, emoji attention. Claim it's for safety and resale purposes if asked. Emoji brain. Yes, she put the brain emoji in her own notes. Nothing says mastermind like emoji-based scheming. After that, there wasn't much else to say. People weren't just angry, they were stunned. It's one thing to be petty. It's another to orchestrate an entire fraudulent legal strategy just to pull off a backyard turf swap. The board issued a formal statement to all residents. It read, in part, Brenda Matthews has been found to have committed multiple ethical violations, misrepresented HOA authority, fabricated documentation, and abused her position for personal gain. All associated permits, invoices, and company contracts are being nullified effective immediately. That letter? It went viral in the neighborhood group chat. Someone turned it into a t-shirt design. I ordered two. Brenda's house, previously guarded by her clipboard and a hedge she'd once fined someone else for having, now stood quiet. Her real estate agent didn't even bother holding an open house. One of the neighbors told me she was spotted packing her moving truck at 5:30 in the morning. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just her, a U-Haul, and probably a clipboard with tear stains on it. And me? I stayed behind. Still enjoying my pool. Still legally, gloriously compliant. Still very much not Brenda. You know how people say karma's a bitch? Well, karma showed up at Maple Ridge wearing flip-flops, holding a piña colada, and cannonballed directly into Brenda's career aspirations. Within 48 hours of the board's announcement, Brenda Matthews' reign of HOA terror officially ended, not with a bang, but with a slow, whimpering exit under cover of dawn. She left like a reverse Santa Claus. No gifts, no explanation, just hauling out boxes of bad decisions one cardboard flap at a time. Her house hit the market with the speed of someone dodging subpoenas. The listing was subtle. Charming two-story with spacious potential and no active pool permits. Translation: get out while you can and bring holy water. But the real entertainment came after her departure. The HOA board, now humiliated and eager to rebrand itself as something less corrupt than a banana republic, hired an independent auditor to go over the past 2 years of finances. Guess who they brought in to help coordinate the effort? Me. Apparently, when you destroy someone with a 3-ring binder and a PowerPoint of doom, you gain a certain reputation. One board member literally said, "You're like Batman, but with spreadsheets." I accepted, not because I wanted to be involved, but because if I didn't oversee it, Brenda's cousin Gary might somehow show up again with a fake badge that says Pool Ethics Enforcer. The audit uncovered over $38,000 in suspect payments to Brenda's businesses. A significant portion was reimbursed by the board from the HOA reserve fund. They even voted to reduce dues for the next quarter to make up for the mess. A suburban miracle previously thought impossible. The city followed up with their own review, opening a formal inquiry into fraudulent permit practices and misuse of community funds. Rumor had it Brenda was being looked at by not just the state attorney general's office, but the IRS. Apparently, Maple Ridge Property Consulting hadn't paid taxes on most of those HOA checks. Shocking, I know. Turns out when you write landscaping disruption analysis as a business expense, but forget to file a return, Uncle Sam starts to take an interest. Gary? His pool business went dark. His Yelp page now reads like a crime scene report. One review said, "This man told me he was a pool safety expert and then tripped over a garden hose." Poetic justice, courtesy of the internet. Meanwhile, the HOA underwent a much-needed transformation. Vendor contracts now required public vote, board decisions had to be documented and disclosed, and every resident was given access to financial summaries each quarter. It was like someone sprayed the entire organization with Windex and finally let the sunlight in. I didn't join the board. I still value my sanity, but I did help create the new HOA handbook. Sarah even designed a cover, a cartoon pool float shaped like a clipboard with a big red X through it. Speaking of Sarah, she'd been my calm through this whole bureaucratic hurricane. When the dust settled, she threw what might be the most petty yet satisfying party we've ever hosted. The Freedom from Clipboards Pool Bash. It was magnificent. Everyone came, even the people who'd quietly backed Brenda early on. Turns out, once the fraud smoke clears, nothing brings a community together like grilled bratwurst and inflatable dolphins. Craig showed up with six-packs. Carol, humbler and considerably more likable now, brought a cheesecake and made a genuine apology. Even Marvin smiled. Once, briefly, someone brought themed cupcakes shaped like little pools. Another neighbor brought a Bluetooth speaker and a playlist titled Brenda Free Beats. Every time someone walked past the pool filter, they patted it like it was a war hero. And the pool? That glorious, blue rectangle of serenity? Now legally certified by not one, not two, but 3 separate inspections. I had the county health department double-check the original installation just to be safe. We passed with flying colors. I even had the final approval letter framed and hung in my office, right next to my CPA certificate and a photo of me holding Brenda's abandoned clipboard like a trophy. At the party, the new HOA president pulled me aside. "You saved this place," she said. Brenda had everyone fooled. "I just read the fine print," I shrugged. "And I don't like being lied to by someone who uses Comic Sans on legal notices." She laughed. "You ever think of doing this professionally?" "What?" "Exposing power-hungry suburbanites one backyard at a time." "Honestly, yeah," I smiled. "I'll stick with auditing. Less chlorine." So, what's the moral of the story? Simple. Never underestimate a guy with a paper trail and a grudge. If you're going to manufacture a fake scandal, you better hope your target isn't someone who audits for a living and considers Excel pivot tables a love language. Because while Brenda thought she was orchestrating a quiet takeover, she accidentally picked a fight with the human version of a forensic laser beam. And now I enjoy my pool. Legally. Proudly. Fully chlorinated and free of clipboard-induced drama. Brenda's gone. The HOA's reformed. And I'm left with the best revenge of all. Peace. And one inflatable flamingo wearing sunglasses, gently drifting in victory. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.